The ambassador's knees hit the polished obsidian floor of the Grand Hall, and Commander Idris Vin felt every human in the room hold their breath at the same moment. 300 of the most powerful beings in the known galaxy sat in silence, watching as the youngest envoy of the Vaz-Kri Imperium stood above Earth's last diplomat with a ceremonial blade already drawn. The blade was not a weapon of war. The blade was a symbol. It had been used 19 times in the last 8 centuries to mark the extinction of civilizations that had refused to kneel. It was being used once more, on live galactic broadcast, in front of every species that still believed the Vaz-Kri were merciful. The envoy's translator clicked through the universal channel. "The Imperium has spoken. Your world will surrender its sovereignty, its resources, and its population registry within one standard rotation, or your homeworld will be reduced to molten silicate before your children draw their next breath." Idris Vin watched Ambassador Chen Wu-Rin raise his head. He did not look afraid. He looked tired. He had been negotiating for 41 hours without sleep, holding 1,000 concessions in his hands, offering half of Earth's mineral rights in the outer belt, offering every human colony outside the Sol system, offering anything that could have possibly spared his children. He had been denied at every turn. So now Ambassador Chen lifted his chin, looked the envoy of 100,000 stars in the eye, and spoke the only thing he had left. "Then we will kneel in the ashes." The blade came down. The broadcast cut to black. And somewhere above the cloud tops of 100 silent cities, the doors of history opened onto a floor that had never been walked before. Earth shook. Not literally. Earth shook in the way continents do when an entire generation loses its faith in the same breath. The Vaz-Kri ultimatum of Sol was replayed 41 billion times in the first 6 hours, and every replay showed the same 3 seconds. The envoy's blade, the ambassador's eyes, the single drop of crimson sliding down the polished floor before the feed died. There were riots in 12 major cities before sunset. There was a candlelight vigil in every capital that held a sky. 7 human ambassadors withdrew from their posts without notice, returning to Earth on chartered ships because they could not bear to face their hosts wearing the same uniform as the man who had been beheaded on live stream. The Vaz-Kri Imperium issued no statement of regret. It issued a confirmation. The first wave of the assimilation fleet had already cleared the hyperspace boundary at Proxima. 14 capital ships of the line, supported by 200 escort cruisers and a logistics train long enough to strip a world of every living thing on it. They were not in a hurry. They had done this before. They had done it to the Takari 30 years ago, and the Takari were, by every metric the Imperium measured, far more advanced than humanity. The galaxy had a historical file on the fall of Sol already drafted, 80% complete, with a section labeled Lessons in the Speed of Conquest. The Vaz-Kri made a mistake that no species in their long, arrogant history had ever made against a species that had once lived beneath wolves. They confused patience with surrender. They confused silence with weakness. They confused the fact that humanity had spent 87 years refusing to enter any galactic war, refusing to join any treaty, refusing to volunteer a single soldier to any of the older civilizations' endless border conflicts, with the idea that humanity was not ready. They were wrong about what ready looked like. What they had no way of knowing was that in the year 2047, a young engineer named Margaret Holloway had filed a classified patent for a propulsion concept that used folded local space as a launch surface. The patent had been quietly purchased by a small Pacific research consortium that nobody had heard of. Across the decades, the consortium became a foundation. The foundation became a department. the department became a bureau, and the bureau became the deepest black line item in the budget of every human nation on Earth. By 2184, that budget had built 17,000 objects in the Oort cloud that were never once observed by any telescope on Earth. By 2210, it had built a fleet. But the fleet was not what changed the war. The fleet was the obvious thing. The fleet was visible, on a long enough timeline, to anyone who watched the right dust storms in the right places. The thing that changed the war had been built deep inside an asteroid called Tethys 9, in a chamber that had never seen sunlight, where 7,000 engineers had worked in shifts for 51 years on a single device the size of a city block. The device was called the Mirror Displacement Array. Its principle was simple. Its engineering was not. It used a harmonic of folded local space, achieved by a chain of 94 cold fusion reactors running in a synchronous chorus, to project a displacement signature onto any point in the galaxy that had been charted by a human probe. The signature did not move ships. It moved the distance itself. A human strike group did not cross the galaxy to attack a target. The distance between them and the target simply stopped existing. The first Vazkri ship to die in the human war did not die spectacularly. It died quietly. The Imperial cruiser Varath was conducting a survey of an abandoned mining colony in the Vega Drift when, at local time 4:11, every system on the ship registered a single anomalous reading at the edge of its sensor range, flickered for 9/10 of a second, and then ran clean. The crew logged it as a sensor glitch. 5 minutes later, every inertial frame on the ship inverted simultaneously. The Varath did not explode. It cracked along 7 distinct structural seams, each one a perfect 831-meter arc, as if something inside the ship had decided it was finished being a single object. The debris field expanded outward in a perfect geometric shell that matched nothing in the Vazkri engineering catalog. The Varath had not been attacked. It had been removed from the equation. The Varath had been the first of 142 Vazkri hulls to be removed in the first 72 hours. The Imperium did not panic. Not at first. The Vazkri had absorbed surprise attacks before. They had weathered the Kinshai incursion of 78-94 and survived the 14 coalition wars. They sent a probe, retrieved the Varath's black box from the debris, studied the structural failure pattern, and concluded that humanity had, against all expectations, developed a single exotic weapon of impressive but limited application. They drafted a tactical note. Cluster the fleet. Present no single point of failure. They did not yet understand that the failure was not the weapon. The failure was the assumption. The failure was the idea that a species without a galactic footprint could not have a galactic strategy. The supreme warden of the Imperial fleet, a being called Ketharul, who had commanded more battles than any living Vazkri, addressed the High Court and made a single recommendation. Double the strike fleet. Burn Sol. Admiral Hala Sorensen watched the Vazkri intercept course from a distance of 9 light minutes aboard the human carrier Resolute, which was holding station in a region of interstellar space that did not appear on any chart the Vazkri had ever seen. The Resolute was part of the 4th Outer Fleet, a designation that was a deliberate lie. There was no 1st, 2nd, or 3rd Fleet on the books of any human navy. There was only the Outer Fleet, and it was 374 ships strong, and every one of them carried a mirror array generator of the same family as the one that had broken the Varath. Sorensen was watching the Vazkri double their hammer because the Vazkri thought their hammer had only slipped once. She keyed her comms to the Oort cloud network and spoke a single word into the silence. Catalog. The mirror array rattled once. The stars rearranged themselves around 374 points of light. The Vaz-Kri executioner fleet had been built to break worlds. 42 capital ships, 2,416 support vessels, and a planetary bombardment train that would take 14 standard years to unload. They entered the Sol approach corridor under the assumption that they would be facing, at most, a token resistance of outdated Terran frigates and a handful of orbital defense platforms that had been catalogued 20 years earlier. They instead faced nothing. The Sol approach corridor was empty. The executioner fleet glided past the orbit of Neptune with no enemy contact logged. The Vaz-Kri tactical officer began to draft the report on the successful, unimpeded arrival of the fleet at the Sol perimeter. He never finished it. The corridor behind them closed. 374 human warships unshrouded from folded space at a mean distance of 4,000 kilometers from every Vaz-Kri hull. They did not arrive in sequence. They arrived all at once. The corridor became a closed box. The Vaz-Kri High Court received the news from the Sol corridor through 17 independent channels in the first 3 seconds after contact. Each channel carried the same image. The image was of a human vessel, unclassified, with a hull configuration no Vaz-Kri surveyor had ever logged. Across the bow of the vessel, in letters the Vaz-Kri could read in their own script and in English and in 7 other common languages of the galactic community, was a single 3-character symbol. The symbol was a mistake the Vaz-Kri had made once, 8 centuries ago, on a species that was less than half as patient as humanity. The symbol was a skull. It had been painted white. It had been painted by human hands, in human atmosphere, on the bow of a human ship, 19 minutes before the Vaz-Kri ambassador's blade was drawn. The ship that carried it had been waiting below the orbit of Pluto for 84 days. The galaxy's news feeds did not know what to do with the image. The galactic community had spent 2 centuries treating humanity as the new species, the late arrival, the civilization that had barely cleared low orbit when everyone else was already building trade lanes through the core. The image suggested that humanity had, in fact, done something no other late civilization had ever done. Humanity had watched. Humanity had watched the Takari fall. Humanity had watched the Kinshai rise and burn. Humanity had watched the Vaz-Kri practice the precise art of erasing species. And then humanity had gone home. And humanity had built, and humanity had waited. Humanity had waited for the exact right day. The day the Vaz-Kri crossed a line they had not crossed in 800 years of clean wars and quiet erasures. The day the Vaz-Kri planted a flag on the floor of the hall with an ambassador's blood still wet on it. Admiral Sorensen delivered the human terms 4 minutes after the Sol corridor closed. The terms were not broadcast over any open channel. They were delivered to the Vaz-Kri High Court in person by a single human diplomatic shuttle that emerged from folded local space in the exact center of the Vaz-Kri throne room on the imperial capital of Varath's crown, with the engines cut and the doors open and a single human officer standing in the doorway with a sealed envelope. The officer walked across the floor of the throne room, past 11,000 Vaz-Kri courtiers who had not moved since the shuttle arrived, laid the envelope on the throne steps, and turned and walked back. The envelope contained 1 page. The page contained 1 paragraph. The paragraph contained the word surrender. The word was not addressed to Earth. The Vaz-Kri emperor read the word twice before he understood what he was looking at. Then he had the human officer seized, had the shuttle grounded, had the throne room sealed. He summoned Catharul by emergency recall. Catharul looked at the envelope. Catharul looked at the map of the Sol engagement. He spoke the only words the Supreme Warden had spoken in his entire career that he would later regret. "This is the only one they have. Hold him. Break him. The others are bluffing." The Emperor granted his permission. The guards led the human officer out of the throne room. The human officer did not look back. The human officer had already transmitted his final report. The report contained a single line. The line read, "Package delivered." They opened it. The mirror worked both ways. The Vaz-Kri had spent 8 centuries fortifying their capital at Varath's crown with the assumption that no enemy would ever reach it, because no enemy would ever be allowed to reach it. They had layered the system with fortress stations, orbital defense grids, long-range interceptor wings, and a planetary shield that no analytic model in the galaxy had been able to defeat on paper. They had never tested the shield against an enemy that did not need to approach. They had never considered an enemy that could simply appear inside the perimeter without warning, without jump signature, without telemetry. The shield was designed for fleets. The shield was not designed for a single human frigate emerging directly above the Imperial Palace at a distance of 4,000 meters. The frigate did not fire. The frigate broadcast a single image across every screen, every channel, every public address on the Imperial capital. The image was the human skull. The image was on the bow of the frigate. The frigate held station for 11 seconds. Then, the frigate vanished. The Vaz-Kri had been shown the inside of an unlocked door. Ketharul knew, in the 11 seconds the human frigate held station, that the war was over. He did not yet understand how it would end, but he understood that the Vaz-Kri had been wrong about the scale of the threat they were facing. The Vaz-Kri had assumed humanity was a single power with a single fleet. The Vaz-Kri had been facing, instead, a species that had built a network that spanned the galaxy, that had placed a mirror in orbit around every system that commanded a strategic lane, and that had activated every one of those mirrors at the exact moment the Vaz-Kri crossed the line at Sol. Ketharul called the Imperial Court into emergency session. He did not ask for reinforcements. He asked for terms. He asked for terms because the Sol corridor was closed. He asked for terms because 18 fortress stations around the Imperial capital had just received a synchronized transmission carrying an image of a human skull and a single text line reading, "We see you." He asked for terms because every Vaz-Kri admiral in 14 sectors had just received, simultaneously, a single dispatch on a frequency no Vaz-Kri ship had ever logged. The dispatch was a series of coordinates. The coordinates were Vaz-Kri command setters. Every one of them was now directly inside the range of a human mirror array. The Vaz-Kri court received the human terms 6 minutes later. The terms were not negotiable. The Vaz-Kri were to withdraw every hull from Sol approach within 1 standard hour. The Vaz-Kri were to return the body of Ambassador Chen Wu-Ren to a human vessel within the same hour. The Vaz-Kri were to issue a public apology to the human species in front of every news service they had ever licensed, in a recording to be supplied by humanity. The Vaz-Kri were to disband the assimilation fleet, demobilize the executioner fleet, and reduce their entire naval presence to a fraction of its current strength for a period not less than 40 standard years. The Vaz-Kri were to pay reparations, equivalent to 19 times the total annual output of the Imvarath star system. The Vaz-Kri were to accept a permanent human consulate on the orbital ring of the Imperial Palace, with full diplomatic recognition and full enforcement jurisdiction within a 1-kilometer radius. And the Vaz-Kri were to kneel. The Vaz-Kri were to kneel in the ashes, on the same obsidian floor of the same grand hall, in front of the same news services that had watched Ambassador Chen kneel. And they were to remain kneeling for 1 full standard minute. the terms would be enforced. The Vazcree fleet in the Sol Corridor had, at the moment the terms were read aloud, exactly 117 capital ships remaining in operational condition. 4 minutes earlier, it had been 142. The Vazcree High Court sat in silence for the 12 minutes it took for the translations to finish. Then the chamber began to fracture. 11 different factions began speaking at once. The military demanded an immediate counterstrike. The trade guild demanded an immediate negotiation. The priesthood demanded an immediate ritual of appeasement. The emperor sat on the throne with the envelope in his hand, and the emperor, for the first time in his life, did not know what to say. The emperor looked at Ketharul. Ketharul looked at the floor. Ketharul spoke a single sentence that would be recorded in every galactic historical archive for the next 40 centuries. We made the wrong species kneel. It was not a tactical assessment. It was a confession. It was the confession of an ancient species that had spent 8 centuries believing that time and patience and a long, quiet century of erased worlds had made them invulnerable. It was the moment the Vazcree understood that the new species had been watching the entire time. The galactic community received the image of the Vazcree kneeling on the Grand Hall floor less than 1 standard day later. The image was carried live on every frequency humanity had license to. The image showed the Vazcree Emperor on his knees, on the same obsidian floor where Ambassador Chen had knelt, in front of the same news services that had carried the ambassador's execution. The image showed 11 Vazcree court officials kneeling behind him. The image showed a human officer reading the terms aloud in a clear, slow voice. The image showed the emperor's hands shaking. The image showed the emperor's eyes. The eyes were the eyes of a species that had just realized, in the space of 1 standard day, that the late arrival had not been late. The eyes were the eyes of a species that had just realized that the new species had been the oldest species at the table all along. Because the new species had been the only species patient enough to count the cost. Humanity did not gloat. That was the part the galaxy did not understand, and the part the galaxy would never forget. Humanity did not parade the emperor. Humanity did not broadcast the kneeling image on a loop. Humanity did not demand additional concessions. Humanity returned the body of Ambassador Chen to the Resolute in a sealed casket with full military honors from both fleets. Humanity restored every diplomatic channel the Vazcree had severed. Humanity posted a single human consul at the Imperial Palace on the exact day the terms required. And the consul's only public statement in her first 6 standard months was a single line on a single plaque mounted at the entrance of the consulate. The line read, "We remember." The Vazcree walked past it every day. The Vazcree would walk past it for 40 years. The galaxy learned, at great cost, what every other civilization had already suspected, but none had ever been able to prove. The quiet civilization that had refused every galactic war had not been afraid of the wars. The quiet civilization had been building the mirror that would end every war humanity was ever asked to fight. The mirror was not a weapon. The mirror was a sentence humanity had been waiting 87 years to finish. The sentence had been completed on the floor of the Grand Hall. The sentence would not be repeated. The galaxy would not give humanity a reason to write it again. The lesson was not kind. The lesson was not forgiving. The lesson was the coldest truth the galaxy had ever learned from a species it had dismissed as the youngest at the table. The lesson was this: humanity does not ask for permission to survive. Humanity does not warn twice. Humanity does not kneel. Humanity had knelt once, briefly, in the ashes of a single ambassador. And humanity had risen. And humanity had answered. The galaxy had not been ready for the answer. The galaxy would spend the next 40 standard years learning to be ready. The galaxy would never be ready. Humanity did not give second chances to species that drew blades on diplomats. That had been the rule before the war. That had been the rule during the war. That would remain the rule after the war, for as long as the mirror held. The mirror would hold forever.